Welcome to Season 2 of Agricola Card of the Week. In Season 2 of Agricola Card of the Week, I'm going to step back a little bit. I'm going to do some foundational material, and then in Season 3, later on in the year, we'll go back to sort of the original format from Season 1, where we sort of focus on one or two individual cards on an episode. I'm going to be talking about the base game and Farmers of the Moor, and why I almost always play with Farmers of the Moor, and some of the major card expansions, sort of things that I think you should consider adding to your game.
Proudly sponsored by Yeoman, available in the App Store now.
So we keep all of our Agricola pieces in the original box and the Farmers of the Moor box. All the cards are in here, we'll get to that in a moment, and the base game we have in here. Got some boards for the Farmers of the Moor. All of our pieces are in individual bags. We've even got the pink pieces, the special breast cancer sort of awareness pieces. I got those for a friend to play with. She really likes those. These excellent little containers we managed to pick up for a couple of dollars at a junk store, $2 store or a pound shop, depending on what country you're in. Excellent little things, and of course all the boards in there, you probably don't need to see those. So our version of the game actually only came with the cubes of the animals and the discs for all the other resources, and honestly that was fine for a while, but I did get the animals from Mayday Games and some vegetable and grain meeples, veggie meeples, also from Mayday Games. We got some wood, and these little triple loggy things, rather than just use these as not fancy wood, we actually use these as a 3 wood token. It's really handy when you've got the +3 wood action space to just be able to grab one of those and plonk it down. It does mean sometimes having to worry about giving a little bit of change when we do wood, but that actually makes things quite handy. I also like the little flat discs for resources when you've got something like the grocer or the food connoisseur where you're stacking up those resources. I do use those when they're easy to stack. And in the Farmers of the Moor we have all of the cards, including all of the cards from these games, as well as the base deck and the Farmers of the Moor deck. If we open this up, we can see they're all in little baggies. You know what? I think it's time to do something about this. Deck boxes. Pardon me for using my teeth there. It would have been nice if I could maybe got some colour-coded boxes, but because of the vagaries of the way Amazon works with international shipping, it was just easier to get them all the same colour. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too boring for you. 3 by 3, 9 decks. One of those is completely empty, so that'll be good when the France deck comes out. I'll have to label these and I might consider reorganising them, but I think that's really excellent. It does sit a little bit high, but I think the extra room's okay, and they're going to stack great on top of other boxes on our stack of boxes. For the remainder of this episode, I'm just going to discuss my thoughts about Agricola, what motivates me to play, a bit of a commentary on some of the different playing styles, and my past experience and future plans as far as the game's concerned. So I've played somewhere between 50 and 100 2-player games of Agricola and a small number of 3- and 4-player games of Agricola. In 2015 I would like to round out my experience. I'm going to be endeavouring to play a lot more 3- and 4-player games. I have also played a lot of solo games on iOS. I've never actually set up the board to play a solo game based with the physical components, but I have played quite a few solo series on iOS. I think it's a perfect platform for that. I never really seemed to manage to get much past the 16, 17, 18 game streak, but nonetheless, a good way, I think, to learn the sequence of what cards come out when, which sort of help you to look at strategies in a slightly different way and kind of round out your experience with the game. I think definitely worthwhile. When I play Agricola, I play to have a functioning engine. So that is a farm that's producing food, enough food to feed my people so that I can use those people to, better my farm, get more points. I am only generally growing my family to the point where I can support them. So there is a philosophy in sort of hardened Agricola players of just, grow your family at any cost, get more workers, worry about crops and animals later on in the game. Not that everyone plays that way, but I have seen games played that way. Really, that's not for me. I like to have a functioning engine. I'm growing my family as I can afford to feed them. Second to that, I like to have an interesting story in my game. I like to pick out some cards that are going to give me something new, something interesting, a combination, a strategy that's different. This is one of the things I really like about Agricola. It's why I'm doing this series. I do think the cards bring a lot to the game and make it very different, especially when you've got that many different cards to play around with. So that at the end of the game I'm looking down and saying, I built that, this is my farm, I've fed my people, I've grown my family to a certain point, and I pulled off an interesting story. Doesn't always get me the most points, although I do tend to do pretty well, I think, but it's more than just about winning for me. I do like to win, and I do try to maximise my points within reason, but it is secondary to having a functioning farm and an interesting gaming experience. Towards the end of the game, I'm thinking, how can I maximise my points in the turns I've got left? I'm thinking, how can I make sure that I've got one of every animal if possible, making sure I have at least a grain and a wheat, if not several of those, and also making sure I'm used as many as my farmyard spaces to avoid those negative points. But as I said, it is really down on my list of reasons why I like the game, and I don't think you should be put off by the fact that maybe you've not won that many games of Agricola, or that the scoring systems means you've got to have a particular kind of a farm. Play to have an interesting time, to develop an interesting strategy, to tell a story with how your farm built up. That's what I really like about Agricola. And that kind of brings me on to the next topic, which is about sort of meanness versus, let's say, competition in a game of Agricola. There's two ways to play any sort of Euro-ish engine building kind of a game. You can play to be trying to block the other people, or you can be playing to build up your engine. Obviously, there's always going to be a little bit of both of those things happening in a game, but the extent to which you focus on building up your engine versus blocking other people can have a big influence on the feeling of the game. If you take a simple example, a game like Ticket to Ride, you can spend a lot of time, if you like, just simply putting railroads out to block other people, to stop them from connecting their cities up, especially when you can start to see the little tracks coming down. You think, okay, they're going here to there, I can kind of block them. Or you can spend your time connecting up your cities, and maybe you get in their way, maybe you don't. I found that second strategy, just more concentrating on connecting up your cities, that's more fun, it tends to lead to more points, and I prefer to play games that way. Similarly, in Agricola, you can play to constantly be trying to sort of grab those resources out from under your opponents, stopping them from doing things like getting clay. I've played games where the other person just continually took clay, and I had no way to build a fireplace. That's all they did for the whole game. There's nothing in the rules that say you can't do that. I just thought that's not a particularly fun way to play. If everybody's playing to have the best, most optimised farm they can have by choosing turns in sequence and sort of maximising the benefit for the turns that they play, if everybody's trying to do that, then at the end of the game everybody's going to have a fairly well built out farm, some probably more than others, obviously. There are, as I said, the other way to play is to be constantly trying to block the other person. There will always be those moments in Agricola where you're thinking, oh, there's two or three things I'd like to be able to do, but I know that my opponents are going to be doing something, and it's really a matter of picking what's the thing that I absolutely have to get done this turn. And sometimes there's those times when you actually manage to pull it off and do all the things you wanted to do on a turn, and no one actually gets in your way. I certainly think that Agricola does have quite a lot of interaction. You're constantly thinking, okay, what thing do I need to do before the other things, and what's the other person or people going to be trying to do, and how's that going to get in my way? But if you know that you're both thinking in terms of we're trying to optimise our own farms, we're not in existence to try and block the other person from doing their thing. I think that's a better experience for everyone. It may not lead to the highest points, although I think on average it does lead to everybody having more points. Of course, you have to be able to adjust to what's going on, and again, one of my goals for 2015 is to play more games, play some online games, and learn to adjust for that. Learn to adjust for the people that are going to go down a road of build the family, ignore the farm, or monopolise certain resources, and learn to adjust for that and cope for that, and develop a series of different strategies for different play. The bottom line of what I'm trying to say here is that I just wonder how many people have been put off Agricola. I know that there's a few high-profile gaming commentators like Z Garcia and Sam Healy that just detest the game. One of the ham tag guys said that he called it an abomination. I just wonder how many people have been put off the notion of playing Agricola because of this sort of heavy-handed, strong strategy, blocking, monopolising kind of strategy versus I'm building out my farm the best I can. How about you build out your farm the best I can? We'll see who does the best at that. I just wonder if there would be a lot more regular players of Agricola if it was more about working together to have an interesting gaming experience together. If you're in a gaming group that works that way, I'm happy for you. My gaming group is like that too, but I've played some games online where I thought, oh my goodness, this is just not the game that I'm used to playing. Some tips for new players. Don't get too caught up in the cards. I love the cards. I play a lot of cards. I have a lot of card decks, as you can see. But you really need to look and think, what's the 3, 4, 5 cards that I'm definitely going to play, and maybe a couple of extras that I might. There's going to be a few that you're going to want to get out there really early on, and some that can wait for later on in the game. Don't play cards early on that really only give you bonus points right at the end of the game. They can wait. You will have turns towards the end where you're thinking, I've got a few extra moves this round, what can I do with those? So, play those cards at the beginning that are really going to give you a benefit from then on, or from very early on through the game. Secondly, build your farm. I think that if you go onto forums and you ask, how do I get into Agricola, but you constantly hear things like, build your family, build your family. Yeah, building your family is great. It gives you more moves throughout the game, but it also is harder to manage. And I think you should have a functioning farm before you worry too much about having a large family. When you get better at the game, you can concern yourself with building your house out earlier, growing your family earlier, taking a little bit more risk on whether you're going to be able to have enough food, maybe relying a little bit more on the odd fishing action space or killing a few more animals a bit earlier than you might have liked to. But I think focus on a functioning farm as your first course of action for your first few games. You will need some sort of a cooking improvement, fireplace, an oven of some kind, or one of the various minor improvement cards that give you some ability to cook food. So most of those require clay, and so in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds of the game, you really should be thinking, I need to get some clay. You'll need at least usually 2 or 3. That's going to be necessary, otherwise your engine simply doesn't function at all. Another tip for starting players is that the grain strategy of sowing and reaping grain and baking bread is actually quite hard to pull off. I do like to incorporate that in my strategy. If I've got some cards that support that, I certainly do go that way. But whilst I do like to have grain on the go early so that I'm starting to build up that supply of grain, it's usually actually not until later on that I'm actually starting to bake that into bread. So again, you're looking at Agricola from brand new eyes. If you're a brand new player, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, well, grain, so that's the quickest thing you can get happening. But as an ongoing strategy, it's actually harder to pull off than it looks. It's really a more advanced strategy. So I look more towards things like getting sheep. If there's anything that gives you vegetables early, we know I love vegetables early, certainly definitely go for that as a new player. Now, most importantly, have fun. And that gets back to what I think about building the engine. Having a functioning farm that looks like a farm, that at the end of the game you can say, hey, I built that, and I put those houses out, and I grew my family, and remember when those sheep bred, and I finally got to bake that bread. I think, that's to me what makes Agricola great. And yes, certainly you can learn to maximise your points, and you can learn to change strategies and get much bigger points and take a few little risks along the way to do that. But I think, have fun building a farm. Enjoy that. So these are the cards we would be using for a 2-player game. Obviously there'd be a lot more occupations in a 3 or a 4-player game, but for the purpose of this demonstration I'm just getting these basic decks out. We keep the minor improvement and the occupation E decks as separate decks, and that's for 2 reasons. One is we can introduce new players by just sort of focusing on those, and the other reason is I typically deal 2 or 3 of these out each to each player, because I find that they combo well with other cards. It's nice to have some good basic familiar cards in with some of the more complicated cards. The bigger decks for the occupation and the minor improvement include the I and K deck, as well as the 4 major expansions, and then the Farmers of the Moor, we shuffled the E deck and the F deck of Farmers of the Moor into one deck, and I'll go into that more next week when I discuss specifically Farmers of the Moor. So typically we do the deal 10 select 7 card system. I know that the drafting system is probably the fashionable thing these days, but I still do like the deal 10 select 7. We typically deal about 3 occupations from the E deck and the rest from the more complicated cards. Typically deal 2 or 3 minor improvements, and then we deal about 3 of the Farmers of the Moor improvements, and I'll explain next week why we chose that number 3, and then the rest from the big huge deck of all the minor improvements across the various expansions. And so we've just found that makes for a nice rounded game. If we want a slightly quicker game, we put out a few more of the easier cards. If we want a more involved or interesting game, we put out more of the I and K and the other expansion from the big piles. So the reason I like the deal 10 subtract 3 system is that you can look over the cards that you have and try to sort of formulate an interesting strategy, a combo of 2, 3, 4 cards that you're going to get out. Sometimes multiple combos of those, although you have to sort of be careful that you don't get too caught up in your own cleverness. But I like that surprise that comes when my opponent pulls out a card and it's like you can see they've been building up to it and you just sort of didn't really know what they were doing, and then suddenly it's like, I see why you were doing that. Or vice versa, and you've sort of got this plan on the go. As I said before, you have to be careful about the cards that you don't get too caught up in, putting too much focus on them, but it's why I play the 10-3 anyway. I like that style.
Proudly sponsored by Yeoman. Available in the App Store now.
So the purpose of this episode today wasn't so much to be a review of Agricola or an in-depth explanation of the game, but just to kind of give you a bit of a tour of how Agricola is to me, my setup, and to sort of introduce some of the notions of what I think of the game in terms of it's not necessarily all about points. It sometimes can just simply be about building up an interesting engine or trying a strategy that you haven't tried before. It's a game of surprise and delight, especially when you bring in these extra cards. I mean, we've got cards in here that we've played many times and cards in there that haven't yet come out. Thank you for watching this first episode of Season 2 of Agricola Card of the Week. In the next episode, I'll be looking at the Farmers of the Moor expansion. Again, not so much a review, but sort of an explanation of how I think it sort of rounds out the game, provides more variety, and why we almost always use that one. And then in the remaining episodes of the series, I'll be looking at each of those major expansions. Again, this is to provide some foundation, some background, and some sort of something that we can build upon in the coming seasons. Season 3 will return more to the original format, and so keep an eye out for that. Please like or leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. In my most recent episode, I discussed ways of getting vegetables early in the game. Farmers of the Moor makes the game different in several ways. One is that your farm is a little bit different every time.